Hello, and welcome to the We Are Cardano podcast. In this episode, we will be welcoming Ben Goertzel to the Cardano community. And in what better way than having actor Nick Stahl from the Terminator 3 movie ask him some questions? With that said, please remember to stake Buffy Pool, ticker Buffy. It does help us out a lot. Again, that's ticker Buffy. Now, enjoy the interview.
Andrew,
Mike,
Shweta,
Adan,
Rayman,
Rick,
Naman,
Amanda,
Patrick,
Bill,
Peyton,
James,
Ume,
Nicole,
I'm Adam,
Steve,
Andrea.
David,
Kyle.
And to those who don't know us, let's introduce ourselves. We're Cardano. And if you'll permit us, we'd like to change the world.
I'm Marco Guerrero and the host of the We Are Cardano podcast.
Hey, I'm Nick Stahl.
I'm Ben Goertzel.
And we're here today to find out, is Ben Goertzel building Skynet on Cardano? And with that, I brought in Nick Stahl, who is John Connor in the Terminator 3 movie, and Ben Goertzel, who is literally building something close to what Skynet is. So, Nick, I think you had a couple questions for Ben.
The first thing that I would ask is just a basic overview of what AI is and what you guys plan, what the plans are for it, I guess.
Sure. So AI, as you probably know, it's not a new idea. Like, the term was coined in the late 1950s. There was major work done back to the 30s, even before that. I got my PhD in the late 80s. The field already had a long history and was quite mature. But like in the last few years, due mostly to increasing computer power and increasing amounts of data and better sensors and so forth, AI has started to take off in a practical sense, right? I mean, a lot of the core ideas have been there for decades, but things are working better now, and more things are working each year than the year before. And I think the general concept of AI is not really that well defined. It's just hardware and software doing things that people think are smart when they see people or machines do them. But clearly, we're seeing more and more practical examples of AI out there in the world. The notion of AGI, artificial general intelligence, as distinct from, what I call narrow AI, or AI that does highly specific tasks only and can't sort of live autonomously in the world. There's another sort of subtle distinction at the core of the AI field, because in the beginning, when the AI field was first developed in the 50s and before that and into the 60s, people didn't make that distinction. They're just like, well, we're going to make machines that think like people, then they'll solve all the practical problems. And what happened over the history of AI is people realized, well, making a machine to think like people is way harder than we thought. But, we can make a machine that recognizes faces, or we can make a machine that diagnoses diseases, or plays chess. Maybe does it in a different way than people, but so maybe it even does it better than people. So the AI field, like between the 70s and now, sort of got diverged from the original thing of like, let's make machines that really think like people are even better, into let's make machines that solve these specific narrow problems. And now I think an increasing, though still small, but an increasing subset of the AI field is now starting to refocus on, well, how would we make a general intelligence? How would we make like an autonomous, conscious thinking agent that was more like, the Mr. Data on the good side, or the Terminator on the bad side, but like an AI that could really, really think like people and have its own will and consciousness, agency, make its own decisions, have its own imagination. So that's still a tiny fraction of the global AI field. It's the part that interests me most, but it's taken way more seriously than it was. Like when I started my career, you couldn't talk about building machines that would really think like people in the computer science department seminar. You only discussed it when having a beer after work, right? Whereas now at least like Google, Facebook, Tencent have teams working on building real thinking machines alongside their much larger teams working on certain narrow functions.
So to simplify it, ANI is basically an AI that does a specific topic, right? Like chess, or controls
Yeah.
traffic lights, or does
Yep.
specific mathematical computations. And AGI, the general intelligence, basically is one that can do think on its own to solve certain problems and use kind of an ANI to help itself.
Well, an AGI can generalize and extrapolate far beyond its programming or what it's been taught. So, for example, we've all learned to deal with the internet, although we didn't learn about it in school, and it certainly wasn't programmed into our DNA. So we managed to like pivot and imaginatively cope with new stuff that we weren't specifically prepared for. And a narrow AI can't do that, right? So think about like a narrow AI driving a car. If you try to get it to drive a tank, it can't do it, let alone like a helicopter, right? Whereas if a person has learned to drive a car, that's going to give them a head start in figuring out how to drive a tank, even sort of a head start in figuring out how to fly a helicopter, because you still got like wheels and knobs and buttons, and you can extrapolate and generalize to some extent about how do you use wheels, knobs, and buttons to control a complex machine, right? So we can extrapolate beyond our preparation, not perfectly and often very stupidly, but better than like a current piece of narrow AI software that just doesn't do that. It only does what it was prepared for. And then you have, beyond that, the next acronym is ASI, Artificial Superintelligence, which is like an AI that's as far beyond us in terms of intelligence as we are beyond like dogs or cockroaches or bacteria,
So
right?
that's
And
kind
that's
of
that would be the ultimate extent of things, which is hard even to portray well in science fiction, because how do you portray something that's far beyond our
well,
comprehension?
it always leads to the simple question: humanity is the problem, right? And that is where Skynet was kind of formed. Like you give it a problem to task, and the only solution that it ever turns out to be is humanity.
Well, I think extrapolating from Hollywood cinema or television shows to reality is fraught with danger. And actually, if you look at science fiction novels and stories over the last century, there's a lot more nuance in terms of AGI and superintelligence, whereas movies and TV shows tend to want to follow a certain arc, which involves, often violent conflict and things that are really exciting to look at,
Well,
right? So I think humans always being the problem isn't necessarily what's going to happen, but there still are serious issues regarding the future of humanity in a world where you have superhuman AGI and artificial superintelligence. I mean, there are many ways it could come out, right? I mean, you could have AIs that want to exterminate people because people are a risk to them. You could have AIs that are indifferent to people, just like when I want to build a house, I'm kind of indifferent to the ants in the ant holes underneath the house. Like you'll just bulldoze them down and squash them, not because you hate those ants, you just don't care, right? You just want to clear out space to make your house. So I mean, this is a Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's a sort of philosopher of AI. He puts it this way: like the AI does not love you, the AI does not hate you, but he can use your atoms for something else, right? AI is enslaving people is very unlikely to happen, because why not just build robots that will do what humans do more efficiently? But AI is wanting to repurpose humanity's molecules to make, more hard drive space for themselves. Seems like that could happen. That's sort of the analog of us bulldozing down the ants to build our house. On the other hand, you could have an AGI or ASI, even though it's way smarter than us, but it respects us as its ancestors and creators, and wants to preserve us, just like we want to preserve a national park with like trees and squirrels and chimpanzees, right? We want to preserve that national park out of our own ethics and aesthetics, not because the animals in the national park are like functionally useful to us, right? So I think you could have advanced AIs that are malevolent, indifferent, or benevolent toward humanity. I mean, it could go any way, and I think we can influence what way it goes by what we do right now, which is why I'm building AI and aiming to build AGI as well as no AI on Cardano, because I think a decentralized democratic platform gives us the best odds of directing increasingly intelligent AI in a positive way. And that's a difference from Skynet, right? I mean, Skynet in the movie, for what it's worth, Skynet was a
Yeah.
centralized proprietary system. It wasn't a democratic, open, and decentralized system. And I think that gets in like the difference between distributed computing and decentralized computing, right? Distributed computing means you're running across a bunch of different computers and using them together for computing process. But the governance doesn't have to be democratic or decentralized. It could be controlled by one guy or one software process. And Skynet was more like that. It's maybe like Cyberdyne. It's made by a proprietary company to make money by providing services. And that's quite different than a decentralized democratic network in terms of how the thing is coordinated. And that difference may be important for, whether we get to a bad or good outcome from this whole progress of AI.
So is just to clarify, your particular niche in this industry is AGI, something like what you described as ASI. This super intelligence is more or less the stuff of movies, kind of theoretical, or is this?
It's the stuff of movies and mathematics theorems now. Like there's a guy named Marcus Huder. He has a book on universal AI. So you can actually more easily make a rigorous math theory of super intelligences than of human level intelligences, which is sort of ironic because in a way, once you become that smart, then your intelligence is simpler to describe it and reason about. So there's some real science theory about super intelligence. But yeah, engineering wise, the path is going to be more like narrow AI, go beyond narrow AI to AGI. Then the AGI is going to figure out how to engineer the super intelligence, right? So that's you can't do much engineering work on super intelligence now, although you can do math theory work, which is interesting. And yeah, my most unique niche as an AI researcher has been my focus on general intelligence. I mean, I introduced the term AGI 15 years ago or something, and have been organizing an annual AGI conference series. So I've been one of the leading voices, maybe the leading one, pushing toward general intelligence. And now, in the last few years, I've pretty much been the leading voice pushing for, well, let's make sure narrow AI now and AGI tomorrow is decentralized and democratically operated, which is where blockchain comes into the picture, because blockchain is sort of the mathematical and software plumbing you need to do to create complex decentralized software processes.
And if I could ask, why? What was it about, I guess, the Cardano system that was attractive in that way?
At my PhDs in mathematics and my approach to building AGI is fairly heavily mathematical. And when you look at the foundations of Cardano, they're more sound than the foundations of most blockchains. I mean, Algorand is also a very mathematically sound, rigorously worked out blockchain, but it's very limited in what it does at this moment. So, I mean, Cardano, it's the only fully mathematically sound, rigorously worked out blockchain platform that has smart contracts, which is Plutus, which is about to be released on mainnet. And to build a decentralized AI network, you need the flexibility that comes with smart contracts. And I think if we want this to be future-proof, both in terms of being, safe and reliable as things develop, and in terms of just being able to adapt to future developments in the IT ecosystem. I mean, you want that mathematical rigor in the foundation. So like the fact that Ouroboros consensus protocol was proved to be valid through formal verification is very nice. Like you're not going to do that for Ethereum with all the horrible mess underlying the solidity and the associated protocols. Then, as a sort of less foundational but associated aspect, I've been coding in the Haskell language since 1993 when Haskell was quite young. So I was really happy to see someone making a smart contract language, which is basically Haskell, which is what Plutus is. It's like Haskell plus some extensions and libraries. And I mean, Haskell is a very math-oriented programming language. Like if you code in Haskell, it's very easily to formally prove that your algorithms do what you said you were going to do. So, I mean, in essence, if someone builds a nasty Skynet on Cardano, it's going to more likely be because that's what they wanted to do. It's not going to as likely be by mistake, because with a Cardano infrastructure, there's better tools for like verifying that your code is going to actually do what you had specified it to do. And that's a very useful feature, right?
Yeah, sounds like it.
Now, you've spoken a couple times now about decentralization. And to me, this is another topic, kind of like how you describe AI. You know, there's ANI, AGI, ASI. To me, there's different levels of decentralization, different systems, and everybody seems to have their own take on it. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel like decentralization really is?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is decentralization isn't necessarily good, right? I mean, decentralization is just the absence of something. It means you don't have a centralized control mechanism. Like in a decentralized network, there's no one guy or there's no small set of actors who have the primary causal influence and control over what happens in the network. So you don't have that. And I mean, what that's replaced with could be better or worse than centralization, right? So that's like in government. So okay, you don't have a dictatorship, you don't have an oligarchy. Well, what you have instead could be Somalia, which is probably worse than a benevolent dictator, right? It could be just complete chaos with rivals of militias going around shooting other people, or it could be something better than a fully centralized government, like a benevolent, an anarcho-socialist utopia, or Western democratic government, which is more decentralized than a dictatorship, right? So, I mean, just as in the domain of human governments, you could have various levels of centralization with various, positive or negative valence. So with software systems, you could have something like Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud, which are centralized software facilities. Everything is orchestrated by one big company. It happens according to their rules. Or you could have a software system consisting of like a bunch of software modules sitting all over the place without any central controller. So any one agent appears, disappears, it doesn't matter. One agent goes rogue, like it can't control all the other ones. It's a network of peers rather than a network with a few rulers. And so that network of peers, of which are software processes collaborating as peers to do something, that could be done in a smart way or a stupid way, and it can be done in a way that has positive benefit for humanity or is negative for humanity. But decentralization opens some interesting doors. And I think centralization in software networks has the same properties it does in human government. Like, in a way, a benevolent dictatorship could be fantastic, right? It did well for Singapore for a period of time. I mean, a benevolent dictator can be very efficient. On the other hand, when that dictator stops being benevolent, things can go awry in a way that's very hard to stop. And the same thing holds in software. And there's also the issue of information bottlenecks. Like Singapore is very small, which is why they could work okay for their government. You're never going to have that work so well for like a country on the scope of US, Russia, or China. There's too much going on, and the centralized decision maker will be an information processing bottleneck, right? And so you have two risks with centralized structures. One is the dictator or the oligarchs go awry and screw everyone. The other is the dictators and oligarchs just can't process all the information needed for central control. So decentralization avoids those problems if it's done well, right? It gives you robustness against anyone driving the network in a bad place for their selfish needs, and it means that information processing can take account of the full scope of all the agents in the network, because you don't have to go through some top level guy for everything. But building a properly governed decentralized network is quite hard, and this is another thing that appealed to me about Cardano is, I mean, Charles Hoskinson not only thought through the sort of mathematical aspects of what it means to make a decentralized consensus mechanism and decentralized smart contract network. I mean, he's also been a quite deep thinker on decentralized governance. And the Catalyst program in Cardano is an interesting example of that, where they're using smart contracts, but also decentralized community to vote on how certain development funds are spent for building out the Cardano platform. And we're building on that in SingularityNET. So as we port SingularityNET under Cardano platform and start releasing a bunch of new SingularityNET AGI tokens on Cardano, 30% of these newly released tokens, we're going to have a community decide in a democratic way what to spend them on, right? And again, we're deviating from Skynet here, right? Like Skynet was built by one company and released on the world. Here we're saying, A, it's all open source code and a nonprofit foundation, but B, 30% of development funds are being democratically voted on by the community and allocated to community-driven projects. And this, you could argue against it. You could say like terrorists are going to take this money and build evil stuff on the platform. So we're placing a bet that the vast teeming chaos of democratically assembling communities is going to be better than us as an elite sort of pulling all the puppet strings directly.
Yeah. I just wanted to touch on something that I heard Ben talk about. This T-shirt right here, it says "Democracy at Work." There's a professor. He does a weekly show called Economic Update, and he's a big proponent of worker co-ops, worker cooperatives, and which is based on just the democratization of the workplace, essentially. So it's as opposed to these hierarchical, structures of businesses that dominates the globe. It's more of a democratic idea of one worker, one vote. Workers controlling the means of production, more or less, which it seems to be more of the direction socialism's going, as opposed to having anything to do with the state. It seems to be more about the employer-employee relationship, and so it's a passion of mine, and there seems to be some parallels in the blockchain world, which again I'm kind of new to, and so I was wondering if Ben could.
That's where the governance comes in, right?
No, it's really interesting. I think in the blockchain world, there's definitely a strong ethos of any authoritarianism and not liking big companies or big governments. I'd say a lot of movers and shakers in the blockchain world tend to be politically libertarian, which I substantially agree with. Like, I don't want government telling me like who to have sex with or what drugs to take, or like outlawing any victimless crime. I think I've tended to be more democratic socialist or anarcho-socialist oriented, and that I would like to see our social systems, take care of everyone. And I think that's going to be increasingly important as work becomes obsolete, and you have a society of abundance, and we want that abundance to be distributed to everyone. But again, I'd come back to the beautiful flexibility of decentralized systems and smart contracts and blockchains, right? Like you you could code a lot of different economic and social systems. You could code a libertarian, like each human for themselves system. You could code like a pure Marxian socialist system. You could code different forms of self-organizing anarcho-socialist things, and you could certainly script a variety of different DAOs for worker collectives and see what works in different industries, right? And we should be seeing way more experimentation with this sort of thing. It's ridiculous, like how cookie cutter the organization of businesses and organizations is, right? So I mean, my hope would be we can see real practical experimentation with like the intersection of blockchain, AI, worker cooperatives, and many other forms of DAOs. I mean, we have the tools. It's a matter of getting adoption, right? And hopefully your friend's organization is going to push forward with that.
Cool. I was wondering if you could tell me about Sophia, and that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So David Hansen is a close personal friend and sort of a mad AI robotics artistic genius. I mean, he's a very unique character. And, you know, I knew David well before he made that particular robot. He was working on the robot of the science fiction writer Philip K. Dick, who was the inspiration for the movie Total Recall and a whole bunch of other cool things, and Blade Runner. And so we had a shared passion for the works of PKD, as well as for the quest to build, you know, compassionate human level and superhuman thinking machines. And I think, yeah, if you look in Philip K. Dick's work, he had a number of focuses. One was that we all live in a simulation, but another was that compassion was going to be the key to getting humanity through all the weird messes that it may create by developing more and more advanced technologies, be it AI or going to Mars or whatever. So Philip K. Dick also had a book, We Can Build You, which involved like animatronic Abe Lincolns and so forth. So yeah, David and I resonated on a lot of things. I was in Hong Kong, and David was passing through to talk to some manufacturers in Shenzhen, and I sort of introduced him to some people that invested in his project in Hong Kong. He moved to Hong Kong, and then while he was there in Hong Kong with me, he, you know, sculpted a new robot face, which he was aiming to be sort of the universal woman, not too much like any one race, but like a blank slate female that would appeal to everyone. And he sculpted this amazing robot. You know, he has this unique face material called rubber, which is more flexible and expressive than other face materials. And he came up with a character for this robot. Originally, she was called Eva, actually, but then the movie Ex Machina came out with a robot looking exactly like his robot, but called Ava. So he, after Ex Machina, like stole his robot's look and feel and name, he changed it to Sophia, which means wisdom in Greek. And yeah, this robot became quite popular. She became the world's first robot citizen. I ended up working like 3.5 years for David at Hansen Robotics, leading the software team there. And I think Sophia has been an amazing character and adventure in sort of bringing the vision of human-like AGI to people who weren't thinking about it otherwise. Right? From an AI view, you view Sophia more as a user interface, right? Because you can run a sophisticated AI system behind Sophia. You can run a chatbot behind Sophia. You could puppeteer Sophia so that she's imitating what a human did. And we've run a lot of different software systems, including some sophisticated and less sophisticated AI behind the robot. Now we're working on Sophia's little sister, which we call Grace, which is another humanoid robot, which is aimed specifically at the medical and elder care market, just like being an assistant in senior living facilities and hospitals. And I think that less showy than Sophia in a way, although she's a beautiful robot with long hair and so forth. But I think that's going to be a start to rolling out Sophia-like robots into large-scale usage. And again, getting back to ethics of AI and Skynet and all that, I mean, I think part of the key to having AGI and then superintelligence be benevolent toward humans, part of the key there is having the AI actually do benevolent things while it's growing up, right? So I mean, if the AI is working in healthcare, if it's working in education, if it's working in science and doing positive things, it's getting these positive human interactions like infused into its mind as it grows. That doesn't give you any guarantee, but I mean, I think it will bias the AI's mind in a positive
what you
direction.
just described was the opposite of the first season of Westworld, where
exactly.
the machines and the AGI is learning all of the negative, horrible things that humanity is capable of, and that's its basis of reality is all of these things. So I find that interesting.
Yeah. The big moral of Westworld was if you're going to build human level AGIs, perhaps you shouldn't raise your robot children by repeatedly raping and murdering them, right? I mean, it's a very poor idea for human children. It's also a poor idea for your AI children.
Well, in a sense, though, they were actually NIs for the most part, were they not?
They were at the interesting boundary between narrow intelligence and AGI, right? Which is part of what made it poignant.
Well, that
right?
was the whole arc of season.
They thought they could make them narrow AIs, but actually to do what they need to do, they ended up having to make them AGIs, and that's what made it interesting.
And Nick, before the show, we were talking a little bit. I think this is what you were talking about was the idea of AI and emotions, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I sort of, had a question that was, I guess, somewhat philosophical for you, and because a glaring trait that human beings have that I guess robots AI would be emotion, and so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and I guess emotional intelligence, and if you consider human emotion more or less an asset for us or a hindrance to intelligence, and or both, I guess.
Well, yeah, there's a lot wrapped up there, right? So I think
Go on, yeah.
Human emotion is its core to what it is to be human, right? So I mean, being human is counterproductive if your goal is to be maximally generally intelligent, right? I mean that's clear, and not primarily because of emotion. Like our short-term memory capacity is like 7 plus or minus 2 items, right? So I mean, wouldn't it be nice if you could hold a billion things in your mind at once? I mean, our whole brain is oriented toward pretty much having a single stream of activity at a time because we evolved to control a body. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to control a billion bodies at one time? But once you can hold a trillion things in your mind's eye at once and control a billion bodies at one time, I mean, your mind's going to self-organize into not being very human anymore, right? You're going to be some other kind of intelligence. So I think emotion is one among many factors which is key to what makes us human, and which helps us to have human-like intelligence, and which just makes us very stupid relative to what some future AGIs and ASIs are going to be.
Well,
and I mean that's
what if you create a? Let's talk about a use case.
I mean, not everything has to be maximally intelligent, right? Like I love dogs and cats, and I don't actually want to uplift my poodles to human level intelligence. Like they're not going to be the amazing things that they are anymore, and not all humans should be uplifted to be ASIs. We wouldn't be the amazing things that we are anymore, right? So I think AIs don't need to have human emotions to be super intelligent. On the other hand, if we want AIs to understand humans and to help humans and to coexist with humans, you need like bridging AIs, right? So we do need to have AGIs that understand human emotion and can empathize with humans, not because that is the best way to make them intelligent, but because otherwise they will never understand what we're about and be able to productively coexist with us.
Well, that brings up an interesting use case while we were just talking there. Let's take the idea of policing and judges, right? It's certain interactions with the police are definitely colored by emotions, be one way or the other. Same with judges and all that kind of stuff. Could AI help or hinder in those type of situations?
Yeah, I mean, AI could help with any situation if it's properly taught and created, I think. And I mean, the question is, how do you get human culture, personality, and emotion into the AI in the first place, right? Because once the AI has been infused with an understanding of humanity, then it can fundamentally empathize to people. It can bridge between different people. So getting human culture and emotion into AI in the right way isn't a programming task, it's a teaching task. You have to embed the AI in the right sort of shared environment so that it can do things alongside people and learn from them that way. And I mean, rolling out humanoid robots into like elder care and education settings is an example of a way to do that.
So we want to avoid RoboCop and RoboCop 2 AIs.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I come down to selling, killing, spying, and gambling, right? Like, what's AI being used for now? It's advertising companies like Google and Facebook, whose ethical dubiousness has become more prominent lately, but was always obvious to those of us in the industry, right? That their surveillance, Chinese government and NSA, global intelligence agencies. Then there's military robots, drones, and so forth. And then there's Wall Street, right? Like extracting money from the masses to the 1%. And this is most of what AI is being utilized for. And actually, probably the thing that annoys me about the Terminator movies is not that it's sort of a comical depiction of like killer robots or police robots or RoboCop or something. It's that it's so obvious it distracts attention from the current actual dangers of AI, which is that intelligence agencies are using them to spy on government enemies, and Wall Street companies are using them to fleece everyone out of their money, right? Because AI is being used to screw people right now, but it's in less visually obvious ways, right? So the fact that there's no robots marching down the street like kidnapping your kids doesn't mean that AI isn't being used by the powers that be to steal your future from you.
Well, I mean, it brings a good point
Right.
because I was just going over the plot of like Terminator 3, the one that Nick was in. And in that one, they were recreating Cyberdyne for the Defense Department and were having the AI control all of their defense systems. But what happened is when they uploaded it to all of its systems, it also got access to the internet. And then after a few hours of access to the internet is when it decided the biggest threat to humanity was humanity, and that it was didn't turn on itself is when it chose to then attack. So that was kind of like the start of it was for the surveillance, for the drones to control all those things, and then it evolved, I should say.
Yeah, and the thing is, we're not going to see like super AGI evolve like right now out of someone's face recognition software or something. It's not that easy. On the other hand, as narrow AI, gradually develops into AGI, we will reach a point where things are close enough that perhaps that final step to the crystallization of human level AGI could happen by some sort of self-organizing emergence rather than by a human, like typing in the last bit of code and hitting enter, right? So I mean, it may not be quite as sudden and mysterious as portrayed in the movie, but I mean, it could possibly be close enough, right? I mean, you say within SingularityNET, which is the decentralized AI platform that we're building and porting to Cardano now. I mean, the idea is you have a bunch of different AI agents created by different people. One could have a learning algorithm, one could have a reasoning algorithm, one could have a long-term memory technique, one sees things, one controls robots, and they're connecting together on the back end. And one of the projects that Charles Hoskins and I conceived, the AI DSL, AI Domain Specific Language, it's for AIs to automatically communicate to each other what they're doing and how they work, so they can automatically decide to cooperate on solving problems or outsource work to each other. So with this sort of infrastructure, I mean, you could have a bunch of previously disparate AIs created by different people automatically decide to join forces using the AI DSL to guide it, and then you see that there's a higher level of emergent intelligence there than any of the programmers had foreseen. So you could really have general intelligence pop out of a decentralized network. I mean, the network has to be more advanced than what we have online at this moment, but still, I mean, the qualitative nature of the phenomenon could be there, right? And so that's then the ethical character of the ingredients from which the AGI is popping out becomes a significant consideration.
Well, nobody has come back in time to kill you yet, so that's
Well, maybe they have. Maybe someone else came back in time to resurrect me, and you missed.
there we go. It was avoided already.
Yeah, I saw a paper on Archive the other day. Someone figured out how you could make a sort of soliton, like a wave that stays coherent but moves through space-time, which goes faster than light, therefore backwards in time. So I mean, by the equations of physics, backwards time travel and backwards causation remains possible, although a difficult engineering problem. So maybe the AGI will crunch those equations better, and it will happen. But the naked thing I'm not betting on, but the backwards time travel might be.
I was Ben. I was just wanted to ask, because I guess a theme that I keep hearing popping up. Whether it's in the Terminator series, or you mentioned Google, and you mentioned one thing I'm getting is that in the hands of private companies that have a singular motive of profit. Sometimes that seems to be where some of the trouble can arise, as opposed to creating technology for well-being and the betterment of a community. And we see it in like automation technology in the workplace, and which could obviously be such an asset in our world, but when left in the hands of private companies, it can also be a means to for jobs to be lost and things like that. So I guess my question is, as AI technology develops, how do you avoid that? How do you avoid it sort of being co-opted just for the private gain of a few people at the top?
Yeah, I mean, so about jobs being lost, my view is all jobs will be lost, and so it's a matter of which jobs are lost at which points in time. So to me, the thinking shouldn't be how do you stop AIs and robots from taking people's jobs. I mean, it should be how do we create a society in which everyone can flourish, even though, working to earn a living isn't necessarily a thing anymore. And I mean, most of our, US is especially poorly instrumented there. I mean, I think, say, the Scandinavian democracies are probably a better model for moving in that direction. But yeah, I would. But those are also small countries that are not controlling most of the globe's resources, right? So yeah, I mean, I think overall human societies and economies now are architected for a sort of regime of scarcity rather than a regime of abundance, and a case where all the material goods that humans need can be created by just AI robots and machinery that are operating and maintaining themselves. Like, we don't have economic and social systems designed to deal with that case, and that it's not hard to think about like how you would create like a benevolent anarcho-socialist utopia where machines are just making everything everyone needs. But the transition plan from here to that anarcho-socialist utopia seems very complicated, right? Because I mean, you're dealing with a situation where a small number of people control and own almost everything, which is insane, right? I mean, just like once the dictatorships are gone, people are going to think it's insane that like somehow one guy was able to control an army that kept millions or a billion people like under his power. People will look back and be like, how the hell, why did all those people let that one guy rule over them all? Why didn't they just kick him out, right? And
Yeah.
in the same way, people will look back and they will think it's insane. Like, one guy did some clever business deals and suddenly this guy controlled like $100 billion, right? Whereas the average person had thousands of dollars. Like, why did society allow that one guy to accumulate all these resources and control them, right? I think in hindsight,
Right.
this will look very, very bizarre and make no sense to people, right? Because like, why don't people just take that money and use it for good? Why don't people just go and kick that guy out of his mansion and take the guns away, right? But I mean, we've self-organized into this really bizarre
Well,
configuration where a small number of people have an insane amount of power, and now we need to
well,
gracefully work our way out of that into an anarcho-socialist sort of situation where material goods and informational goods are just supplied by machines humming in the background,
well,
right? And that
I think people are
I
afraid of loss of status, right? Like, how do I prove that I'm better than my neighbor? How does my neighbor prove that they're better
Yeah,
than their
but you can
next?
give people status. Just let them play a video game and get a lot of points, right? I mean, yeah, that is an issue, and I think it's a demographic issue, right? Because like I have 3 kids, uh, range, I guess 23 to 31, as well as 2 little babies now. But I think for my 20-something kids, they would welcome a society of abundance where nobody had to work for a living, like totally not an issue. Then they don't have to worry about their career anymore and they can just enjoy themselves and do more productive things. I think for more people in my generation, like I'm 54, right? Then people have sort of gotten into a mindset where like having a bigger house than someone else or a higher status job than someone else is like that's how they define themselves. That's what they think is important, and that that's a psychology and culture issue which will need to be worked around. I mean, just as the fact that Jeff Bezos doesn't give away 99% of his money like his ex-wife is doing is a psychology and culture issue, right? Because if you have $100 billion, you could whittle your net worth down to like $20 million, and you're still going to have like a pretty easy life. You're not going to have to work
Well, see,
again, right?
that's
So,
why I'm
I
such a
mean,
huge fan of Cardano, right? Like, I have a nice stake in Cardano, but I don't ever want to sell it. I want to live comfortably off of just the rewards. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be able, like, I could easily, if it hit $20 or $15, sell it and be well off, but I don't need that much money, right? what I need,
Yeah.
what I could live comfortably off of just the rewards of something like that. And so,
Yeah, I mean, the crypto ecosystem clearly has a lot of brilliant ideas in it. And I mean, if you had, well architected tokenomic systems founded on, provably correct smart contracts like we can have in Cardano, I mean, it's not that hard to figure out how you would write the scripts to enable, a benevolent, democratic, decentralized governance and economic system that would even change over time in a way that would lead us from a society of scarcity to a society of abundance. I mean, just as Cardano has progressively decentralized over time, I mean, you could progressively modulate the economic system to move toward an abundant society. The thing is, the whole crypto sphere in itself is a tiny sliver of the global economy, and many countries outright outlaw, utility tokens that are liquid and publicly exchangeable,
Well,
right? So I mean, that the tool set is there, and it's really cool.
I mean, for
And we're
example, I've been
using it
gaming
for
out
what
for
we're
the
trying to
last several months of how do the whole rent to own concept with a smart contract, right? Because housing is one of the major issues here in the U.S., right? Everybody's renting. Banks won't let people borrow money to buy a house, but then tell them to go spend twice as much money to rent a place, right? So the idea of bringing back a rent to own, right? So the person that's renting in their smart contract, that money then goes back to the builders, who are then building the next place. And since it's all on the blockchain and it's all created like in a circular system, there's no corporation to take the profits, and so the profits just circle back through. The renter pays to own, which pays the next building to be built, which then goes to a new renter, which then pays to rent, which goes to build the next building. And you could do this because of smart contracts and the idea that there is no like one person siphoning all of the money from the top. It's something that I'm, playing with the idea of, and I think crypto and the use of AI could help save a lot of money and time and, building schematics and all that kind of stuff with something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the systems are there, and that's, it's a very exciting time because with what we've done in SingularityNET, with what Cardano is doing, and with a bunch of other projects in the ecosystem, which can all be made interoperable and interlinked. I mean, we have the tools to really enable a radical reformation of the economy, right? And I mean, we were briefly talking earlier about worker collectives, which Nick, I know you've been involved with, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
a worker collective could be implemented as a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, and which is a democratically governed collective, which is different than a standard nonprofit organization or for-profit corporation, right? It can be whatever you script it in the smart contracts to be. And I mean, you can have a worker collective as a DAO. You can have a AI worker collective as a DAO. You can have a combined human AI worker collective as a DAO. You can sort of script whatever you want for the benefit of the people and artificial agents involved in it. So I mean, I think we're at a point where we have amazing tools for AI, for decentralized governance, for decentralized computing, for scripting and creating new forms of social and economic organization. I mean, it's all there, but again, getting adoption is probably the most dramatic challenge during the next period, because I mean, building a centralized company, while also very difficult, is easier, right? I mean, you seed something, then you get venture money, and you build something, you sell it to a mega corporation. There's sort of a cookbook for it, right? I mean, it's not that it's simple to do and doesn't require like long hours and no sleep and a lot of gambling, but there's a template. It's followed all over the world now, right? Whereas to build these decentralized democratic networks for broad benefit, I mean, this is treading new territory on every
It has
level,
to start.
right? On the
It has
math
to start
theory.
somewhere, right?
Yeah, in the math theory, in the software, in the business structures, in the culture, in the social organization, even in the way of thinking of the people involved in it.
Well, we have. I'm starting with my nephews, who are very, very young, and I'm starting to train them in that kind of thinking. So,
Good,
with
Tim.
that, we'll go ahead and call it for today. It's been wonderful, Ben. Wonderful, Nick, and I want to thank you guys for being on.
No, this was great. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben.